You've hit rock bottom. Maybe it came after the loss of a job, a breakup, or a string of failures that crushed every ounce of confidence you had left. You're standing on the edge of everything you thought you were, staring into a pit of uncertainty. The ground feels cold beneath your feet, and every breath feels heavier, like you're carrying the weight of every missed opportunity and regret. People tell you to keep going or that things will get better. But let's be real. Right now, none of that feels true. In moments like this, when life feels like it's unraveling at the seams, you have two choices. You can let this darkness consume you, or you can turn it into fuel. There's a hidden power in these moments of absolute despair, and it's not about pretending everything is fine. It's about embracing the fall. Because the truth is, sometimes you need to hit rock bottom to discover what you're truly made of. Think of the ancient world, where some of the greatest figures faced their darkest hours. They too had moments when everything collapsed. But instead of staying down, they found something in that darkness, something that ignited a fire in them. And that fire didn't just help them survive, it turned them into legends. Let me take you on a journey, starting with the story of Diogenes, a man whose life was shattered, but who found a philosophy in the rubble that changed the world. Picture this: Diogenes, once a banker in the bustling city of Sinope, was suddenly stripped of everything. A scandal, defacing currency, left him exiled, penniless, and ridiculed. He was cast out, wandering through foreign streets with nothing but shame clinging to his name. The noise of the marketplace buzzed around him as he sat, not on a throne of power, but in a cold ceramic jar, a man who had fallen lower than anyone could have imagined. Can you imagine the whispers, the sneers, the judgment from those who had once respected him? The stench of rejection clung to him like damp cloth, suffocating and inescapable. But here's the twist. Diogenes didn't try to reclaim his wealth or his status. He didn't look back. Instead, he threw off the chains of societal expectations. He realized that everything he had lost wasn't worth chasing in the first place. The money, the prestige, none of it mattered. He chose poverty not as a curse, but as a path to freedom, rejecting materialism and embracing cynic philosophy. Imagine the taste of that freedom, the bitter yet empowering realization that when you lose everything, you're no longer bound by anything. That's what Diogenes embodied. He lived in a jar, carried only a cloak, a staff, and a bowl. He begged for food, mocked society, and spat on the very conventions that had once defined his life. And guess what? His radical lifestyle became a legacy. Diogenes showed the world that sometimes losing everything can be the first step to finding true wisdom. When you're standing at rock bottom, think of Diogenes. The loss might feel like a pit, swallowing you whole, but maybe it's not a pit at all. Maybe it's a chance to break free from everything you thought you needed and find something deeper. He turned the humiliation of exile into a philosophy that still resonates today, reminding us that rock bottom is not the end. It's the place where you decide what really matters. Now let's talk about Zeno. He wasn't born a philosopher. He was a wealthy merchant, sailing the seas, making his fortune, living a life that most people would envy. But then came the storm, the kind that tears through your life without warning. His ship, loaded with precious cargo, was swallowed by the ocean's fury. In an instant, everything he had worked for, everything he had built, was gone, sinking into the depths of the sea. The salt spray of the waves wasn't just in the air, it was in his lungs, in his soul, as he stood on the shore, watching his wealth disappear. Imagine the crushing weight of that realization, the helplessness as the cold water lapped at his feet, mocking him. His life, as he knew, it was over. Everything he had depended on, every ounce of security, was ripped away in that storm. But Zeno didn't stay on that shore, lamenting his fate. Instead, he walked into a bookstore in Athens, seeking something more than what money could provide. There, he found the teachings of Socrates, and in that moment, a new path opened before him. He immersed himself in philosophy, not as a hobby, but as a lifeline. He didn't just study Stoicism, he built it. Out of the ashes of his former life, he created one of the most enduring schools of thought in human history. The storm that should have broken Zeno became the catalyst for his greatest achievement. He discovered that real wealth isn't in gold or possessions, but in resilience, wisdom, and the ability to remain unmoved by life's tempests. The winds that tore his ship apart couldn't touch his spirit, and that's what Stoicism teaches us. You can't always control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond when you're standing in the aftermath of your own storm. Remember Zeno. The wreckage around you might seem overwhelming, but within that chaos is the seed of something greater. It's not about avoiding the storm. It's about finding your strength in the middle of it. Now, think about Moses. Raised in the luxury of Egyptian royalty, he had everything: wealth, power, influence. It was all at his fingertips. But one rash decision changed everything. He killed an Egyptian in a moment of anger, trying to defend a Hebrew slave, and suddenly his world crumbled. He fled into the desert, a murderer on the run, leaving behind everything he had ever known. The desert is an unforgiving place, barren, desolate, where the wind carries whispers of regret. Each day, under the scorching sun, must have felt like a punishment, a reminder of the life he had thrown away. Can you imagine the isolation, the crushing silence of the wilderness, as the weight of his guilt bore down on him? But it was in that wilderness, that place of exile and shame, where Moses found his true calling. In the quiet of the desert, amidst the sand and the stones, he encountered the burning bush, a symbol of something greater than himself. It was here, at his lowest point, that Moses was given the task of leading his people out of slavery. From the depths of despair, he rose to become one of the most revered leaders in history. Moses' story reminds us that even in our darkest hour, when we feel like fugitives running from our past mistakes, there is potential for something greater. The desert, the exile, the loss, it's all part of the journey. What seems like the end can become the beginning of a new chapter, one that defines your legacy. Moses didn't just escape his past. He transformed it into a mission that changed the course of history. When you feel lost, when you're wandering through your own personal desert, remember Moses. The wilderness is not a place of death. It's a place of transformation. It's where you shed the skin of who you were and step into the role you were meant to play. Hannibal Barca, the man who brought Rome to its knees, was a force of nature on the battlefield. He crossed the Alps with elephants, a feat that seemed impossible, and for a time, it looked like nothing could stop him. But after years of victories, after bringing terror to the heart of Rome, Hannibal faced his greatest defeat at the Battle of Zama. Everything he had worked for crumbled in that moment. He lost the war, and with it, the hope of conquering Rome. Can you picture it? Standing on that battlefield, surrounded by the carnage of defeat, the stench of blood and sweat filling the air, the weight of failure pressing down on his shoulders. Hannibal could have surrendered then, accepted his fate, and faded into obscurity. But he didn't. Even in defeat, he refused to be conquered. Hannibal went into exile, moving from court to court, always staying one step ahead of the Romans who hunted him. He became a political advisor, using his brilliance to aid other kingdoms in their fight against Rome. He didn't let his defeat define him. Instead, he found new ways to continue his mission, new battles to fight, even if they weren't on the battlefield. Hannibal's story is a testament to resilience. Even when the world is against you, even when you've lost everything, you can still find a way to keep fighting. Defeat doesn't have to be the end. It can be a turning point, a moment where you redefine your path. Hannibal never stopped opposing Rome, even in exile, because he understood that as long as you're still standing, you haven't lost the war. When life knocks you down, when you're standing in the ruins of your own defeat, remember Hannibal. Defeat is only final if you let it be. There's always another way to fight, another path to take. You just have to be willing to find it. Finally, let's talk about Cleopatra. Her story begins not with triumph, but with exile. Early in her reign, Cleopatra was overthrown by her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. Cast out of Egypt, the land she was meant to rule, she found herself in Syria, stripped of her power, and facing the crushing reality of betrayal. Imagine the sting of that betrayal, the desert winds whipping through the air as she plotted her return. The taste of defeat would have been bitter, like dust on the tongue, the oppressive weight of exile pressing down on her shoulders. Yet, in the heat of that despair, Cleopatra did not break. Instead, she crafted one of the most legendary comebacks in history. Rather than accepting her downfall, Cleopatra smuggled herself back into Egypt in the most daring way imaginable, wrapped in a carpet and delivered directly to Julius Caesar. It wasn't just a bold move. It was a calculated risk, one that would change the course of her life and the fate of Egypt. Through her alliance with Caesar, Cleopatra regained her throne and became one of the most powerful women in the ancient world. Can you imagine the rush of adrenaline when that carpet unrolled, revealing the queen herself to Caesar? The air must have been thick with tension, the heartbeat of history pulsing through the moment. Cleopatra knew that failure was not an option, and she used every ounce of her cunning and determination to rise back to power. Her story teaches us that even when you're exiled, when you've been betrayed by those closest to you, there's still a way to fight back. The world may try to cast you out, but you don't have to stay in the shadows. Cleopatra didn't wait for an opportunity to come her way. She seized it with both hands. showing the world that no matter how far you fall, you can always rise again. When you feel like you've been exiled from your own life, remember Cleopatra. Exile is not the end. It's the chance to rewrite your story, to take bold risks, and to prove that no one, not even the world, can keep you down if you refuse to stay down. Now that we've walked through these stories, let's be real for a second. Life doesn't always play fair. Sometimes you're going to lose. You're going to face betrayal, defeat, exile, and failure. You'll be knocked down so hard that it feels like the world is stomping on your back while you're lying in the dirt. But here's the thing. There's power in that dirt. There's power in those moments when you feel like you've lost everything. Because in those moments, you're free. You're free to let go of everything that was holding you back. The expectations, the fear, the noise. When you hit rock bottom, you have a choice. You can either let it bury you, or you can use it as a foundation to rebuild. And when you rebuild from that place, you're not building on sand, you're building on stone. Think about Diogenes, Zeno, Moses, Hannibal, Cleopatra. They all found themselves at their lowest points, facing odds that would have broken most people. But instead of giving up, they found power in their darkest hours. They found a way to turn that pain into strength, that defeat into a weapon, that loss into a legacy. Rock bottom isn't something to fear. It's something to embrace. Because when you're at your lowest, that's when you see what you're really made of. That's when you find out who you really are. It strips away the layers of who you pretended to be, and it forces you to confront your true self. And from there, from that raw, unfiltered place, you can start to build something new, something real.